D. Deterritorialization. The function of deterritorialization, D, is the movement by which one leaves the territory. It is the operation of the line of flight. There are very different cases. D may be overlaid by a compensatory reterritorialization obstructing the line of flight. D is then said to be negative. Anything can serve as a reterritorialization, in other words, stand for the lost territory. One can reterritorialize on a being, an object, a book, an apparatus, or system. For example, it is inaccurate to say that the state apparatus is territorial. It, in fact, performs a D, but one immediately overlaid by reterritorializations on property, work, and money. Clearly, that land ownership, public or private, is not territorial, but re-territorializing. Among regimes of signs, the signifying regime certainly attains a high level of D, but because it simultaneously sets up a whole system of re-territorializations on the signified and on the signifier itself, it blocks the line of flight, allowing only a negative D to persist. Another case is when D becomes positive, in other words, when it prevails over the re-territorializations which play only a secondary role, but nevertheless remains relative because the line of flight it draws is segmented, is divided into successive proceedings, sinks into black holes, or even ends up in a generalized black hole. Catastrophe. This is the case of the regime of subjective signs, with its passional and consciousness-related D, which is positive but only in a relative sense. It will be noted immediately that these two major forms of D are not in a simple evolutionary relation to each other. The second may break away from the first, or it may lead into it, notably when the segmentations of converging lines of flight bring an overall reterritorialization, or one benefiting a particular segment, thus arresting the movement of escape. There are all kinds of mixed figures, assuming highly varied forms of D. Is there absolute D? And what does absolute mean? We must first have a better understanding of the relations between D, the territory, re-territorialization, and the earth. To begin with, the territory itself is inseparable from vectors of deterritorialization working it from within, either because the territoriality is supple and marginal, in other words itinerant, or because the territorial assemblage itself opens onto and is carried off by other types of assemblages. Second, D is in turn separable from correlative re-territorializations. D is never simple but always multiple and composite, not only because it participates in various forms at the same time, but also because it converges distinct speeds and movements on the basis of which one may assign at a given moment a deterritorialized element and a deterritorializing element. Now, re-territorialization as an original operation does not express a return to the territory, but rather these differential relations internal to D itself, this multiplicity internal to the line of flight. Compare with theorems of D. Finally, the earth is not at all the opposite of D. This can already be seen in the mystery of the natal, in which the earth, as an ardent, eccentric, or intense focal point, is outside the territory and exists only in the movement of D. More than that, the earth, the glacial, is deterritorialization par excellence. That is why it belongs to the cosmos and presents itself as the material through which human beings tap cosmic forces. We could say that the earth, as deterritorialized, is itself the strict correlate of D, to the point that D can be called the creator of the earth, of a new land, a universe, not just a reterritorialization. This is the meaning of absolute. The absolute expresses nothing transcendent or undifferentiated. It does not even express a quantity that would exceed all given relative quantities. It expresses only a type of movement qualitatively different from relative movement. A movement is absolute when, whatever its quantity and speed, it relates a body considered as multiple to a smooth space that it occupies in the manner of a vortex. A movement is relative, whatever its quantity and speed, when it relates a body considered as one to a striated space through which it moves, and which it measures with straight lines, if only virtual. D is negative or relative, yet already effective, when it conforms to the second case and operates either by principal reterritorializations that obstruct the lines of flight, or by secondary reterritorializations that segment and work to curtail them. D is absolute when it conforms to the first case and brings about the creation of a new earth, in other words, when it connects lines of flight, raises them to the power of an abstract vital line, or draws a plane of consistency. Now what complicates everything is that this absolute D necessarily proceeds by way of relative D, precisely because it is not transcendent. Conversely, relative or negative D itself requires an absolute for its operation. It makes the absolute something encompassing, something totalizing that overcodes the earth and then conjugates lines of flight in order to stop them, destroy them, rather than connecting them in order to create. It is in this sense that we have opposed conjunction to connection, although we have often treated them as synonymous from a very general point of view. Thus there is a limitative absolute already at work in properly negative or even relative Ds. Above all, at this turning point the lines of flight are not only obstructed or segmented, but turn into lines of destruction or death. For the stakes here are indeed the negative and the positive in the absolute. The earth girded, encompassed, overcoded, conjugated as the object of a mortuary and suicidal organization surrounding it on all sides, or the earth consolidated, connected with the cosmos, brought into the cosmos following lines of creation that cut across it as so many beginnings. Nietzsche's expression, "Let the earth become lightness." There are thus at least 4 forms of D that confront and combine and must be distinguished from one another, following concrete rules.